Welcome back to the show. We're calling this one Reformed Thinking.
Good to be here.
We're doing something pretty specific today. We've taken a stack of sources, all from the world of theology, and we're going to try and, pull out the most practical nuggets for you.
Right.
We want to see how these old, sometimes pretty dense ideas apply to the reality of your life right now.
And I think it's good to set the ground rules for this deep dive. When we say Reformed thinking, we are being really precise. We're two Protestant Christians, and we're looking at all this material through a very particular lens. We're trying to ground our whole discussion in the historic tradition of Reformed theology.
Yeah, and for us, that means keeping things consistent with, say, the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Exactly. It gives us a framework.
It does. We're not just, reading a text in isolation. We're looking for a systematic understanding of how God relates to his people. And for this deep dive, we're focusing on C.S. Lewis.
Specifically, Mere Christianity.
That's right. But we're not even doing the whole book. We are zooming way in on just one chapter. It's titled, Let's Pretend.
In that title, it's a chapter that stops a lot of people in their tracks.
It stopped me. Think about that title for a second. Let's pretend.
Right.
In most Christian circles, and honestly in most moral frameworks in general, pretending is a bad word. It's a negative thing.
It immediately makes you think of hypocrisy.
Yes.
Yeah.
It implies being fake, putting on a show.
Yeah.
We're usually taught that authenticity is, the highest virtue. Be true to yourself.
So when C.S. Lewis, who is usually so rigorously logical, comes along and tells me that the next step in my spiritual life is to play a game of make-believe.
You have to pause.
You do.
Why is he advocating for something that on the surface just sounds like lying?
And that's the hook, isn't it? It seems so counterintuitive, and I think our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack that tension. We need to get a handle on the distinction Lewis is making between deception, which is, hiding who you really are, and aspiration, which is more like acting like who you want to become.
I know we're going to get into some pretty heavy concepts later on. I saw the notes about, what was it, rats in the cellar?
Oh, yeah.
That sounds visceral.
Yeah.
And very Lewis.
It is a strong image, and it connects directly to what we believe about human nature, about sin, from a Reformed perspective. But before we get to the rats, we really have to understand the mask.
The mask. Okay. So Lewis kicks this whole chapter off with two stories. He says, let me put two pictures in your mind. The first one is a classic fairy tale, one we all know, Beauty and the Beast.
And most people know the Disney version, of course, but the original story has a specific detail that Lewis really zeroes in on.
Right. So the story is the girl is forced to marry this monster. She does it. But the key detail Lewis highlights is that she kisses the monster as if it were a man.
Even though it isn't.
Not at all. She treats this beast with the dignity and the affection that you would give to a human being. And because she treats him that way,
he actually becomes a man.
Exactly. The act of treating him as something he wasn't helped turn him into what he could be. It's a fascinating idea.
And then he immediately pairs that with a second story. This one's a bit more obscure, but it's just as effective.
Yeah, the one about the man who wore a mask.
Right. A man who had to wear a mask for years, and this mask made him look much nicer, much more benevolent than he actually was on the inside.
He was, for all intents and purposes, hiding his true face.
He was, and here's the twist. When he finally took the mask off, years and years later, he found that his own face had actually grown to fit it.
Yeah.
He had become the man in the mask.
So what started out as a complete disguise, a deception, it became a reality.
That is the principle Lewis is building the entire chapter on. He's making a pretty bold argument that the external action, the putting on, can actually shape the internal nature.
And this isn't just like pop psychology, fake it till you make it.
No, not at all. This is getting at the very mechanics of what we call sanctification, how we change.
Okay, so let's bring this down to earth. Lewis transitions from these fairy tales to something that pretty much every Christian does, maybe without even thinking about it. The Lord's Prayer.
Our Father.
Just those two words. We say them so automatically. Our Father, who art in heaven. But Lewis, he stops us right there. He says, do you have any idea what you were doing when you say those words? You're pretending.
It's a really startling claim when you first hear it, but you have to follow his logic.
Okay.
When you say Our Father, you are putting yourself in the place of a son of God. You are standing in a position that legally and naturally belongs to one person, Jesus Christ.
And Lewis then immediately reminds us of what we actually are. If I look at myself honestly in the mirror, or if I listen to my internal monologue for 5 minutes, I am not naturally acting like a son of God. Lewis calls this a bundle of self-centered fears, hopes, greeds, jealousies, and self-conceit.
And that is the Westminster Confession right there. I mean, that's the doctrine of total depravity in a nutshell. We aren't born naturally inclined toward God's will.
Not even a little bit.
No, we are born inclined toward self. So when this bundle of greed and jealousy stands up and says, "Our Father," presenting himself as if he shares the will and the interests of God, that is, as Lewis puts it, a piece of outrageous cheek.
Well, outrageous cheek. I love that phrase. It's so British, but it's true. It's audacious. It is almost disrespectful, isn't it?
It would be, except for one small detail.
What's that?
We were ordered to do it.
Right. It's not arrogance if you're obeying a direct command, but it is still pretending. We're dressing up as Christ.
And this brings us to the core distinction. Why pretend? What is the good of it? And this is where Lewis breaks it down into two clear categories. There's bad pretending, and then there's good pretending.
Okay, let's define those because that's critical.
Yeah.
Bad pretending is what we usually think of when we hear the word.
Correct. Bad pretending is when the pretense is there instead of the real thing. It's the substitute.
So like the man who promises to help you, and he acts like he's going to help you, smiles, pats you on the back.
But has absolutely no intention of actually doing it. That's deception. That is hypocrisy.
Okay, so that's bad pretense. What's good pretense?
Good pretending is different.
Yeah.
It's where the pretense leads up to the real thing. It's the precursor.
Uh-huh.
Think about children. Lewis uses the example of children playing shop or soldiers. When a little kid puts on a pot for a helmet and marches around with a stick, he's not a soldier.
Of course not.
He's pretending. But by playing the game, by going through the motions, he is, in a small way, hardening his muscles, sharpening his wits, and preparing himself to maybe one day be a soldier in reality. The game is the training ground for the reality.
I see this with my kids all the time. They play house. They pretend to be the parents. They are not parents, but they are practicing the empathy and the responsibility that they're going to need 20 years from now.
Lewis then applies this directly to our social interactions. He talks about putting on a friendly manner.
This is such practical advice. He asks, what do you do when you don't feel friendly? And we have all been there.
Oh, yeah.
You're at a party or you run into someone you find particularly annoying and you have absolutely zero desire to be kind or patient or gentle.
The world, and especially our modern culture, might tell you, be authentic. If you don't like them, don't fake it.
Show them your true self.
Right. But Lewis, and I would say Christian ethics in general, says something totally different. He says, no, put on a friendly manner. Behave as if you were a nicer person than you actually are in that moment.
And the weird thing is the psychological feedback loop on that is real. When you force yourself to act friendly, you often start to actually feel a little bit more friendly.
And the inverse is true, which Lewis is quick to warn us about. If you allow yourself to act rudely, you will feel more rude.
It's a spiral.
It's a spiral. If you indulge the behavior of the old man, as Paul would call it, the sinful nature, you reinforce that nature. If you put on the behavior of the new man, you encourage those feelings to grow. You're carving a new groove.
This is where it moves from just general psychology into real theology.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis says, when we were dressing up as Christ, the entire internal monologue changes.
Ah, so.
It stops being just about conscience, following a list of do's and don'ts, and it starts being about a person.
This is a critical shift in the Reformed understanding of sanctification.
Mm-hmm.
It is not just moralism. It is not just be a good boy or try harder.
Right.
When you're pretending to be Christ, when you're putting on that mask, you start to notice things that you wouldn't notice otherwise. Lewis gives this great example of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
You might be kneeling down to say your prayers, but then you realize you are actively ignoring a duty.
Yeah, like helping your wife wash up the dishes or writing that letter you promised your friend you would write a week ago.
Exactly. And if you're just following a rule called say prayers at 8 p.m., you might just ignore the dishes. You're checking the box.
I've done my duty.
But if you are pretending to be Christ, you're forced to ask a different question. Would Christ ignore the need for service right in front of him to go kneel down and be pious? And the answer is clearly no. The pretense forces you into a higher, more holistic reality of obedience.
It's all about what the New Testament calls union with Christ. Lewis says we're trying to catch a good infection. We're not just copying a historical figure from a book. We're trying to let his actual life invade ours.
And that leads us to some specific terminology Lewis uses that I think is incredibly helpful. He makes a distinction between two Greek words for life, bios and Zoe.
Okay, let's unpack that. Bios.
Yeah.
That's the root for biology, right?
Precisely. Bios is natural biological life.
Right.
It's the life we get from nature. It runs on food, air, and water. But crucially, it always runs down. It decays. It eventually dies. That is the life we are all born with.
So that's the default setting.
That's the default. And then there's Zoe. Zoe is the spiritual life. It is the life that has existed in God from all eternity. It is uncreated, undecaying, and eternal. And the whole point of Christianity, Lewis argues, is not just to make bios a little bit nicer.
It's not just to polish up the tin soldier.
Exactly. It's not about polishing the tin soldier. It's about turning the tin soldier into a real, living man. It is to inject Zoe into bios.
The tin soldier analogy is so good because a tin soldier is completely separate from the child who's playing with it. But if that tin soldier actually came to life, it would share the nature of the child.
And the part of us that resists this change, that's the tin part, our fallen nature, that bundle of self-centered fears, it clings to its tinness. It doesn't want to be turned into a real man.
What happened?
Because that involves a kind of death. It involves surrendering the autonomy of being a tin soldier. You have to give up control.
So how does this infection happen? How do we actually get Zoe? Lewis talks about the means by which Christ works on us.
He does. He talks about nature, our own bodies, books, even anti-Christian experiences. But he lands very heavily on community, on other people. He says men are mirrors or carriers.
Carriers. There's that infection metaphor again. We catch the life of Christ from other people who already have it.
This connects directly to the Reformed doctrine of the church. The idea that we are not meant to be solitary Christians. We can't be.
Yeah.
Lewis does some spiritual math here. He says that when two Christians are following Christ together, there isn't just twice as much Christianity as when they're apart. He says there's 16 times as much.
16 times. That's exponential growth.
It is, and it highlights the absolute necessity of the visible church. We need to be around other carriers to catch the infection. You simply cannot sanctify yourself in a vacuum. You need the friction, the encouragement, and the fellowship of other believers.
But then right after that, Lewis drops a really important warning. And as someone who has seen people get badly burned by church leaders or, disappointed by their heroes, this part is so crucial.
It's the warning against idolatry, plain and simple.
Right.
Lewis says that while people are carriers, they are never the source. He goes back to an analogy he uses elsewhere of a baby and its mother's milk. It's natural and right for a baby to first take the milk without really knowing the mother.
Okay.
But eventually, the baby must grow to recognize the giver, not just the gift. You have to look past the milk to the mother.
And if we don't make that leap in our spiritual lives, we're in big trouble.
We're building our house on sand. Lewis is incredibly blunt here. He says, the best of them will make mistakes. All of them will die.
Wow.
If you pin your entire faith on a human being, even the holiest, wisest pastor or mentor you know, you are setting yourself up for a catastrophic collapse.
That is such a hard balance to strike. Because on one hand, he's saying we desperately need community, we need these carriers. But on the other hand, he's saying, don't you dare worship the carrier.
You have to look through them to the Christ they're carrying.
So we honor them, we love them, but we don't build our house on them.
That's it. Our foundation has to be Christ alone.
So we're pretending we're trying to catch this good infection. We're hanging out with other carriers. And ideally, we're slowly becoming these new little Christs. And then Lewis just hits us with a dose of reality.
Yeah.
He talks about his own experience with his evening prayers.
This is where we get to the rats in the cellar.
Yeah. Lewis admits that when he reviews his day, the sins he finds are not usually some grand, villainous plot to take over the world.
Yeah.
They're almost always sins against charity. He says he has sulked, or he snapped at someone, or he sneered.
The sins of the temper, the sins of the attitude, the small, ugly things.
And the common excuse we all make is, well, I was caught off guard. Or I didn't have time to correct myself. I was tired. They startled me.
We have a tendency to think that the real us is the calm, collected, thoughtful person we are when we're alone in a quiet room reading a book.
Yes.
We think the person who snapped when the coffee spilled all over their laptop, that's not the real me. That was just a momentary reaction to stress.
And Lewis just says no.
He completely destroys that defense. He says the suddenness of the provocation did not create the ill temper.
Oh,
It revealed it.
that hurts.
He gives this image. If there are rats in a cellar and you go in shouting and stomping your feet, the rats will all hide. You'll go in and say, see, no rats.
Right.
But if you fling the door open and turn on the light suddenly, you'll see them scrambling for cover. The suddenness didn't put the rats there. The rats were always there. The suddenness just showed you what the cellar is actually inhabited by.
Man, this is the doctrine of total depravity in high definition. The sin is not just the action of me snapping at my wife. The sin is the nature inside of me, in the cellar that wants to snap. The rats are resident in the soul.
And Lewis points out the terrifying implication of this metaphor.
What's that?
The cellar is out of reach of your conscious will. You can control your acts to some degree. You can bite your tongue. You can force a smile when you want to scream. But you cannot, by a direct act of your will, change the fact that you wanted to scream. You cannot kick the rats out by simply willing them away.
There's a line that just stands out. He says, I cannot, by direct moral effort, give myself new motives. We are bankrupt.
And that realization of bankruptcy is the actual beginning of the gospel. As long as you think you can manage the rats yourself, you'll just keep playing the moral improvement game.
You'll just keep trying to be a better, more polished tin soldier.
Exactly. It's only when you finally realize, I have rats in the cellar that I cannot reach, that you finally give up and say, God, you have to do this. I can't.
It forces us into a state of total reliance on God. We realize we cannot manufacture this change of heart. It has to be a gift.
Which pivots us perfectly into the final movement of the chapter. We started this whole conversation with us pretending to be Christ. Lewis ends it with God pretending.
Divine make-believe.
Yes. God looks at us. He sees the rats. He sees the self-centered, greedy, grumbling, rebellious human animal. He is under absolutely no illusions about who and what we are.
And yet,
he says, let us pretend that this is not a mere creature, but our son.
he treats us as if we are Christ.
This is the very heart of the doctrine of justification. When God looks at a believer, he does not see our sin. He sees the perfect righteousness of Christ. He declares us righteous long before we are actually fully righteous in our behavior.
He treats us as sons before we really learned how to behave like sons.
Lewis uses that mother and baby analogy again here, and it's so beautiful. A mother talks to her baby as if the baby understands every word.
Right, the baby is just making noises, bubbling, cooing.
But the mother speaks to it in full sentences like a rational human being. And because she treats the baby like a human, the baby eventually becomes a human who can speak and understand.
Or the dog analogy he uses.
Right. We treat our dogs as if they're almost human. We talk to them, we give them personalities, and in doing so, they become something more than just a wild wolf. They become a companion.
The higher thing raises the lower thing by treating it as if it were already higher.
That's it. God's pretending is the engine that actually drives reality. He is not deceived. He knows we are messy. He knows about the rats. But he treats us according to the future he's making for us.
He sees the new little Christ inside the sinner, no matter how small or weak that new life is. And he interacts with that.
As Paul says, he calls into existence the things that do not exist.
Okay, let's trace the whole arc we've traveled in this chapter. It's really something. We start by pretending. We try to act like Christ. We say, Our Father.
Aspirational obedience.
Yes. And this attempt to pretend immediately reveals our complete failure.
Yeah.
We see the rats in the cellar because we realize we can't sustain the act perfectly for even 5 minutes. That failure drives us to despair of our own ability, which then forces us to rely on Christ. And then we find out that Christ has been pretending all along, treating us as sons so that we might one day actually become sons.
It moves from our feeble, clumsy attempt at imitation to his powerful divine act of recreation.
Yeah.
It shifts the entire project from us obeying a set of rules, like a Marxist or a Platonist might follow a philosophy, to us interacting with a living person who is surgically removing the old self and implanting the new self.
It takes so much of the pressure off. I mean, the pressure to be good is just crushing if you think it's all up to you.
It's impossible.
But if the pressure is just to stay close to the source, to stay in the way of the infection, that feels possible.
It changes the focus from performance to abiding. We don't pretend in order to earn God's love. We pretend because we have been given a new role, a new identity to grow into.
So what does this all mean for the listener today? I mean, what's the big takeaway?
I think the most practical takeaway is to not be afraid of that fake it till you make it dynamic in your spiritual life, as long as the goal is true holiness. If you don't feel like praying, pray anyway. If you don't feel like loving your neighbor, act lovingly toward them anyway. Don't wait for the feelings to arrive before you act. Act and trust that God uses the action itself to shape the feeling.
And also check your cellar. Don't be surprised when the rats show up.
Exactly. When you snap, when you feel that surge of jealousy, don't just brush it off as, oh, I was just tired.
Right.
Admit it. That is the rat. That is my fallen nature. Confess it. And then remember that God sees that rat and still calls you son.
That is the beauty of reformed thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's brutally realistic about the depth of sin and wildly optimistic about the power of grace.
Yes. It holds those two things in tension.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought to chew on. We've talked a lot about how God treats us. He treats us as little Christs in order to help us become that. Well, if you are a carrier of Christ, as Lewis says, and if you are meant to imitate God, how does this change the way you treat the difficult people in your life?
Ooh.
I mean, if you treated that annoying coworker or that estranged family member, not as they are in this moment, but as the little Christ they could be, what would happen?
That is the challenge, isn't it? Can we actually participate in God's divine make-believe toward others? Can we learn to speak to the new man in them, even when the old man is screaming at us? That is where the rubber really meets the road.
And if you are a carrier of this infection, what kind of infection are you spreading today? Are people around you catching anxiety and cynicism and criticism from you? Or are they catching a little bit of Zoe?
That is a question worth asking yourself every single morning.
This has been a deep dive into C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. We hope this helps you not just understand the book, but, live the life. Thanks for listening.